listening to the Deadly Uncle Podcast,
a safe space for Deadly Uncle conversations.
All right, everybody, we're here today with Mr. Bert Crowfoot is going to be our guest today. He's the founder of the Aboriginal Multimedia Society. The Aboriginal Multimedia Society of Alberta. And he's oversees Windspeaker Radio Network, and it's going to be a great conversation. So welcome to the show, Bert.
He's also Trent's boss.
Yes, so we'll have to, I'll watch my P's and Q's. You can ask the tough questions.
Hello, Bert. How you doing?
Good. Been busy.
That's awesome. Well, it's nice to have you on. And, just tell us originally where you're from and, how you landed in the Edmonton area, first of all.
Well, I was born a small Blackfoot child. No, just I was born at Siksika. My mother is a Soto from Key Reserve in Saskatchewan. And was a couple of years, and then grade 3, they sent a bunch of us off reserve to Carsland. So I was there till grade 7, and then my mother joined the Mormon Church, and as part of the placement program, it was kind of like the Mormon residential school, sorta. But what we did was we were sent away in September and lived with a Mormon family for 10 months, never went home, and finally went home in June. So in grade 8, I ended up in Calgary, and then grade 9 to 12, I was in Edmonton, and I had great families, really good families that I stayed with. And so I went to university at Brigham Young University in 1972. I was there for 3.5 years, and then finally decided to take a year off. I came home. I was a silversmith. I made silver and turquoise jewelry. I was doing that over the summer, and then in November, a friend of mine was the editor of the Native People newspaper, and he gave me a call and said he needed a basketball tournament covered. When I went to university, I was in pre-med for the first semester, then I switched to physical education recreation. So he basically told me that, sports, do you want to cover this basketball tournament for me? And down in Southern Alberta, I said, sure. So I went down, took pictures, covered it. He must have liked it because the next weekend he sent me down to Guyanai to cover a hockey tournament. Same thing, brought back pictures, wrote the story, and then he hired me full-time. So November of 1977 is how I got my start in media and how I ended up in Edmonton.
That's a pretty good amount of time to get to media. You kind of just stumbled into the coverage on newspaper. So what led you to start the AMSA organization then? Because you started working with this newspaper, and AMSA, I know, how did that all start, and what did it engulf at first? Because now there's radio stations under the umbrella, newspapers. How did it all start, and what were the beginnings like, is what I'm trying to say.
1977, I was there for 4 years. I was in print. I also had a week of photography in high school, darkroom and all that sort of stuff. So naturally I got thrown into the darkroom. I also self-taught myself photography, and so that's one of my things that I love to do. So writing for the newspaper, I kind of worked my way up to become the assistant editor. Back then, they ended up having, this is the Alberta Native Communications Society, ANCS. That was the society that overlooked the Native People newspaper. They also had radio and television. But anyway, I was on the print side, and my partner and I hired a salesman, and all of a sudden we had this $105,000 deficit, And with sales, we turned it around, and in 8 months, the deficit was gone, and we were generating revenue through ad sales in a newspaper. By then, 1981, a new board came in, and they knew we weren't too happy because they were really strict, and I was used to being in control and running things, and so we had a meeting with the executive, and they said, just lay everything out. We'll let's resolve this situation. So we did, and I told them exactly how I felt. I said, you guys just came in. I said, I've proven I can run run the newspaper with and make money and not have a deficit. So give me a budget, and if I blow the budget, then fire me. So, and then I don't know. I was only 26, 27 years old, and I got a little mouthy, and I said, I said, you guys have only been here for a couple of months, and I said, if it wasn't for me and the staff, it used to be 11 people in there, and there was only three and a half, three full time and one part time person. If the three and a half of us couldn't do the job, you'd still have a deficit. So, I said, you're taking credit for bringing it down when you had F all to do with it. And they didn't like that, so I got fired. And so this was at about 4 o'clock. We went upstairs, and we had on a Thursday, because we had to finish this newspaper. So I stayed till 11 o'clock, finished the newspaper. The next morning I went in, I put the newspaper on the executive director's desk, and I said, here, it's finished. Go through it. We didn't put anything in there to slander you guys. So, and then I went upstairs to clean up my desk. And, a few minutes later, they came up and said, you got 5 minutes to get out of here. And I said, look, I was here to midnight or 11 o'clock. So I'm staying till I'm done. So take a hike. So I left, went for lunch with, the guy who hired me. He got fired too. So went for lunch, and the salesman came with us. And the salesman said, look, whatever you guys are up to, I'm in. I like you guys. So we started thinking, okay, what can we do? So we like doing newspapers. So we started another newspaper in my basement called The Nation's Ensign. And so it became, it was a monthly. We were the first native newspaper in Canada to go color. The Edmonton Sun was just out, and they had they were using color, and so we adopted a lot of the things that the Edmonton Sun was doing. We even had a sort of a sunshine girl kind of a thing, but we called it Walk-in Beauty, and it was our beautiful women in their traditional outfits, buckskin,
Wow.
and so that was our sunshine girl, or it was called Walk-in Beauty. So, and we took our first copy to the annual meeting of the place that fired us and handed them all out and everything else. And there was the old thing, oh, it'll never last. You'll never put out another one, whatever. But, 6 months later, we were still hanging in there. Anyway, as time went, my partner and I, the guy that hired me, we started seeing, we started having differences. And so I left, and I put out 1981. I put out Powwow magazine called 1981 Powwow Trail, and so I was almost done with that. And then he came back to me and said that he needed my expertise, and so I went back, and we got government funding from the provincial government. They gave us 125,000, and a few months later, we still had differences, my partner and I. So I left, and the old place that fired me, ANCS, they hired me back in 1982, and so I went back. I was there for a month, and then they lost their funding due to mismanagement. So there I was. I had all the staff. We were sitting there, and I went to visit the ANCS's lawyer, and he was a really good guy, Rudy Gellert. We were good. I became good friends with him, and we sat in his office at 8 o'clock at night and started doing different, like just talking about different things. And we incorporated this society called the Aboriginal Multimedia Society. Uh, the staff was kind of in a funny situation because they weren't laid off. The place went into receivership, so they weren't unemployed, and they couldn't collect DI. And so what uh, what we did was we I was a hunter, so and I I basically fed some of these guys over the winter,
Mhm.
and I submitted a proposal to the federal and provincial government, and both funding agencies really liked what I was doing. That's why they gave us the money, the 125,000 a year before, and so they accepted my proposal. And the only condition was that I picked the board of directors, and they said, "Look, we would prefer that we give you some names for the board, and then you'll get approval for funding." And I said, "Sure, why not?" And as it turns out, the people they suggested were awesome. They were really a good board of directors. So in March of 1983, they said, "Go ahead." And so all the staff that had been sitting around waiting, we went into the boardroom of the Secretary of State of Heritage Canada now, and we put together our first newspaper in 3 days. And we went out to the web printer in Fort Saskatchewan. They ran our first copies. The first newspaper was called AMSA. And so we did print for the first couple of years. And then there was this new program called the Northern Native Broadcast Access Program in 1985. And we received approval for that. And we were given the option of going into radio or television or both. And my philosophy has always been, you don't do two things poorly. I'd rather do one good and then work on the other once the other one's established. So we chose radio. And so when we first started in radio, we were given an hour on CBC TV. We didn't have a distribution system. So we were called the radio station on TV. There was the CBC logo, and then there was we did an hour every morning from Monday to Friday from 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock. A new program came out, and which allowed for us to establish uh, small repeaters in isolated communities, 10-watt repeaters. So that first year, we received a grant to put in 10 small um, 10-watt transmitters along the northeast part of Alberta where the CBC didn't go. And the next year we put in 12, and the year after that another 12, and after that we put in some more for a total of 48. So here we had this network of small 10-watt community radio stations throughout northern Alberta, high level. There's this line called the Hamlin Line that came down Highway 16, went north of Edmonton about 60 miles or 100K, and it just kind of looped over. And then as it hit Highway 16, west of Edmonton or east of Edmonton, it came down and went down the Yellowhead Highway to the Saskatchewan border. So this funding was only for north of the border. So that's basically how we got started in radio. CBC decided that cartoons were more important than Indigenous radio, so they told us that they weren't going to distribute us anymore. But by this time, we already had this network of 48 small transmitters. And because we had to be north of the Hamlin Line, our first studios were in Lac La Biche, the old RCMP headquarters. As a matter of fact, all the cells were our first studios. So, you know, I remember some of our hosts saying, "Geez, I remember being in here, but I wasn't on air. I was." So, yeah, a lot of memories in that place, a lot of fun. And so our radio was up there for a while. And then in 1990, the federal government cut the grant for newspapers, and in that on that day, 9 out of 11 native newspapers shut their doors. And so I've always um, I've always been a I don't run AMSA like a not for profit. I run it like a business. And so one time I was traveling in the north, and my brother gave me a set of tapes called "The Psychology of Winning" by Dr. Dennis Waitley, and there were 6 cassette tapes in this kind of folder type package. And the first week I listened to lesson one, driving. Second week, lesson two, all the way to lesson 12. I also coached sports back then at a pretty high level, women's softball, basketball, and so I started learning a lot of sports psychology, and the typical things when one door closes, another one opens, turn up, turn stumbling blocks into stepping stones. Uh, when something bad happens or negative happens, what's the lesson? So when they shut down all of these native newspapers, the federal government basically gave everybody 6 weeks to become self sufficient. And like I said, 9 out of 11 newspapers closed their doors. The 10th one was Wawate, and they used some of their radio money to keep their newspaper going. And with us, thanks to sales and everything else, we had a $250,000 nest egg that we had built up, and we used that to keep Windspeaker going. So since 1990, that's 34 years, Windspeaker's been self sufficient. So that's one of the things that we're quite proud of. It's evolved from a newspaper to a digital newspaper. Now it's an online news service. So that's one aspect of it. On the radio side, we when we lost the funding, we went to the government and said, look, we can't afford to operate 2 studios, one in Edmonton and one north of the Hamlin line. So they said, okay, that's fine. You can move it back to Edmonton. So we did. And after that, we started expanding south of the Hamlin line. We had studios in Muscatcheese, or repeaters in Muscatcheese, and in St. Paul, all these different areas. We started moving everything south. So eventually, like I said, now we cover the whole province.
That is quite the story, Bert. That is quite the journey. You know, it seems like you've always kind of, taken the reins of becoming, either someone who's a producer or a boss of whatever you're doing. And so my question to you is, being a groundbreaker, especially in 1977, that's when I was born. That's wild to think. But, being a groundbreaker, what was your experience, being Indigenous, not only from, the non-Indigenous side, but also your own people, because we're healing, as even today, there's a lot of what we call crabs in the bucket and that type of thing. So what was your experience, being an innovator and someone who's making, the first steps?
I remember someone telling me that if you're going in for an operation for your heart in the hospital, do you want to have the best Indigenous surgeon, or do you want to have the best surgeon, period? Well, tell you what, I want the best surgeon, period. I don't care yellow, black, or white. I want the best. So that's always been my driving force. It's, yes, being Indigenous is very important, but that's not the reason. And whatever I strove to do, whether it be softball, and like I said, in women's softball, I coached the Alberta team in the Canada Summer Games. I was asked to throw my name in for Canada's national women's softball team. I wouldn't have got it, but it was just nice for them to say, put your name in when they're recruiting a new coach. I was offered a couple of jobs in the States, Pacific Lutheran, and also University of Tennessee at Chattanooga to coach women's softball, university level. And I turned them all down. But because of those tapes that my brother gave me, The Psychology of Winning, you know, I always wanted to become the best at whatever, not the best indigenous, but the best at whatever. So when it came to those newspapers closing their doors, one of the lessons I learned is like when something bad happens, what's the opportunity? Well, I sat there thinking, okay, now 9 out of 11 newspapers shut their doors. There's a void across Canada. What's the good thing about that? What's the lesson, right? Well, as I mentioned, there was a void, so Windspeaker went national, and it filled that void. And then we had to, because Windspeaker covered local news, a lot of our local people who were used to coverage were saying, "What the heck? You don't cover us anymore. You're covering the rest of Canada." So we created another newspaper called Alberta Sweetgrass, and that covered Alberta. And then we created another one called Saskatchewan Sage, and that covered just Saskatchewan local news. And then we created another one called BC Raven's Eye, Ontario Birch Bark. We had another one we were looking at for Manitoba called Buffalo Spirit. But what happened was there was already 2 or 3 newspapers in Manitoba. I went to a sweat in the valley of the Little Bow, south of Calgary, and in that sweat, you go up on the hill. There's a buffalo jump there, and I went up on top, and I could see teepee rings all over that valley. Dozens and dozens of them, and so this is a place where our people used to run the buffalo off that cliff, and they would camp there, and they would butcher and take care of all the animals, right? So in that sweat, I came to the realization that Buffalo Spirit wasn't a regional newspaper, but actually a cultural one. So we started a segment of our newspaper. Our newspaper started off as AMSA for the first 3 years, and then finally became Windspeaker. So this Buffalo Spirit became a cultural section of Windspeaker. So that's how we kind of, when opportunities come up, you take advantage and we fill that void locally, and so that's, like I said, one thing that we've always evolved. You look for opportunities. Another thing I always believed in is surround with yourself with positive or good people and get out of their way. Teach them what you want them to. Teach them where you want to go and what you want them to do, and then let them do their thing. Don't micromanage.
That's a great point. We talk about creating space here. We've talked about it in our music careers and things like that, where when you get to a certain point, it's almost like our responsibility to open up doors for other people before us. And I've seen that in what you do. Like you create space for people that are just coming into like broadcasting. Like I was given an opportunity with no experience. I got trained, and then you just kind of let me hit the ground running. So what do you think? What am I trying to say here? What I'm trying to say is, was it ever a thought in your mind when you started these media companies that, Indigenous people should be telling their own stories? Because that's the void that I think you filled the most here when it all started, is like, now we have ownership of our own stories. How important was that to like the driving force behind AMSA?
We just didn't kind of turn you loose.
Yeah, I know. I was trained. But...
We did try to give you some direction, but
yeah.
Early on when we first started, we had non-Indigenous people because, I hired one guy on a 1-year contract, and he came in and he was a brilliant at running newspapers, and I learned a lot from him. And after a year, we didn't need him anymore. And so uh, I didn't renew his contract. And he went to human rights and said I didn't hire him because he was white. And then human rights came in to see me and they said, what's going on? And I said, well, he was white when I hired him. He was white when I fired him. What happened? Did he change color on me? And they just kind of looked at me and said, okay, no, there's no issue. So they let it go at that. So what I did was I learned as much as I can from people. The same thing in photography. All these photojournalists for the Edmonton Sun, the Edmonton Journal are awesome people, and they shared their knowledge with me. And so I've had a lot of people that came in, and I've learned from them. But and when we first started AMSA in the radio side, we had Jeff Bear, who was our first director. He's more of a filmmaker than a radio person, but he took care of getting us started. And then Ray Fox was here for a while, and he's an Indigenous producer from Saskatchewan, and he did an awesome job. And then we needed to overcome that that spot, and we started bringing in a couple of non-Indigenous people who were professionals in the media, and they had their point. They taught us, but we started seeing a situation where we were starting to sound like all the other radio stations in Edmonton. Like uh, 30 seconds, cut it right there. Or 60 seconds, you don't go over. You don't wander. This is all of the standards that mainstream radio does, and I felt that we weren't we lost that indigenous perspective, that feel. So that's when Jeremy came back in, and I told Jeremy, these studios are our lodges, and that's why if you look at our studios, there's pictures of teepees or pictures of our people. That's who you're talking to. And so, what I wanted them to do was to, like, we had one of our non-indigenous guys that were running it called one of our on-air hosts and said, "The word is bush, not bus. The word is fish, not fish." You know, and
I
so
like that.
he took the indigenous sound and accent of our on-air person and tried to make him sound like mainstream, right?
Mm, yeah.
And that's when I knew that we'd gone too far. And so, you know, this one elder had said these studios are our lodges, and our on-air people are storytellers. So that's why we kind of got away from the 30-second, 60-second do this. We're saying, okay, you're storytellers. You know, you're that camp crier who walks around in the morning years and years ago uh, at 4 o'clock in the morning, just as the sun was coming up, calling out what was happening during the day. You know, so we're that those camp criers. So all our on-air people need to be able to tell stories, to be able to pass on the news, and that sort of thing. And so that's what we wanted to achieve, and we have. When you listen to people on the radio, I can tell immediately whether a person's indigenous or if they're not, just from their accents. Just how they say things. If you once you get to understand the accents of indigenous people, I can listen and say that person's from Musquecheese. This person is from Alexis. This person's from Saddle Lake, just by the accents of how they talk. And I remember CBC interviewed me one time as one of the coaches for Canada's Summer Games in Calgary, and they wanted footage of me coaching the Team Alberta, and they also wanted pictures of me at a powwow taking pictures. So, and I told them this. I said, I can tell by the way they look or the way they talk where they're from. And so this guy walked by, and I said, he's from Morley. And so they walked up and said, "Excuse me, where are you from?" "Oh, I'm from Morley, you know." And I did that 3 times, and I was right every single time. And they were just blown away, right? It's just features, family features.
Yeah.
So I study people. You know, I listen to people, and so and that's how we came to the point of where we are today, where we have some non-indigenous people working for us, but those guys have become adopted, and they even understand. When they're talking, they they're actually they're very much or more indigenous than some of the indigenous people I know, which is kind of cool.
It's the stories that, as Trent said, I think are hugely important to catch, and I'm getting into film myself, so I'm just at the beginning stages of everything. Just capturing stories is something that I want to do. Growing up, yourself, we hear a lot about toxic masculinity, because this is a men's podcast, and it's we're talking about men's mental health, and things that are usually not spoken about, and one of those things is toxic masculinity or asking for help. And so I just was wondering, was there any programs like available that you've seen for men, not only just indigenous men, but just men growing up in your time?
I've never differentiated between men and women. To me, it's always been people. Um, when you'll find that a lot of women are treated different when they enter the workforce and indigenous organizations. A lot of them don't make as much money as the men do. There's a lot of biases, a lot of thing that goes on that we shouldn't be proud of. But one of the things that I'm proud of is that all our employees, male and female, we hire the best person for the job. I don't care if they're male or female. We pay everybody the same. Poorly, right, Trent?
No complaints. No complaints.
But we pay everybody the same. There's no differences because you're a man, you're going to get more money. It's all based on the job. And so I try, I'm almost 70, almost, and I am 70. And I've reached that point in my life where you have to focus on the important things. And to me, you're at that point in your life where those subjects are important, but to me, they're not. The male toxicity, I try to focus on being positive, on putting all of my energy into something that's going to do good. Uh, you can, how do I say this? If you're looking at your issue, you know, you can look at how do I heal myself or how do I make myself better. You have a choice. And I've always looked at how can I make myself better. Unless how do you heal yourself is affecting that. Then you have to deal with it. Um, a lot of, we've talked about this before, a lot of the people in your age group are the keyboard warriors. They haven't lived life, but they'll sit there and they'll just go on and on and on. And I'm thinking, just go do it.
Mm-hmm.
We just
Yeah,
had
we
that
were just
conversation.
talking about this. Yeah.
You know, do something.
Yeah.
And like one of my goals when I in 19 and like I said, part of this sports psychology uh, is goal set. In 19 I think it was 70, no, 1987, we had a goal setting workshop. And in that goal setting workshop, we brainstormed. And in that very first day, it was okay, what can we, you know, just brainstorming. There's no, oh, that's not, you'll never do that sort of thing. You just throw everything out there, you know. And some of the goals that were put forth was we had bingo just started, and we were making a couple 100,000 a year. And, you know, one of the goals that came up was $1 million in bingo sales. And people kind of rolled their eyes and said, yeah, right, that'll never happen. And then another one was a 100,000 transmitter. All of ours were 10, right? And we wanted a 100,000 watt transmitter. Well, and everybody kind of said the same thing. Yeah, okay, well. And then after that, when you got all your goals written down, you have to break them up. Okay, this is, okay, never happened. Pie in the sky. Okay, possibly happen maybe 10 years, 5 years, 3 years, 2 years, 1 year, 6 months now. So you break them into those categories, right? So, but some of those goals, you don't dismiss them because, oh, that'll never happen. You know, 100,000 watt transmitter. Well, on February the 29th, we're firing up our 10th one. And I'm getting a t-shirt that's going to say 1 million watts of indigenous power.
Nice.
Think about that. 1 million watts in Alberta. You know,
That's amazing.
and so, you know, when we talk about 100,000 watt transmitter, you know, there's 10. You know, $1 million in bingo sales. Yeah, right. During COVID, we did $6.7 million in bingo sales, and
Wow.
that's what pays for those 100,000 watt transmitters is revenue from bingo, right? So we had one radio station, CFWE, the Native Perspective. 7 years ago, we applied for the old Aboriginal Voices Radio had a network across Canada, and they failed, shut their doors, and 5 of those licenses came up, and we applied for the Alberta ones. And so we went to hearings in Ottawa, CRTC, and there was about 6 different groups applying for everything. APTN had applied for all 5. We applied for the Edmonton Calgary, and CFNR in Northern BC applied for Vancouver. So, as it turns out, we were successful in getting the Calgary one and Edmonton one. So, we launched CJWE in Calgary, and that's where you guys are at right now, or that's where Trent works. And we had a small 10,000 watt transmitter in the Porcupine Hills that covered Piikani and Kainai. But it didn't cover much range outside of those things. But, you know, last month we fired up the transmitter in Lethbridge, you know, a 700-foot tower. And that thing covers all of southern Alberta. And I'm hoping it covers all of the Blackfeet in the Browning, right? On the 29th, we're firing up the Medicine Hat one. And that's all part of that CJWE network. The Edmonton station is the Raven, and that's everything but country. So we've got country in CJ and CF, and with the Raven, it's everything else. Then we came up with 2 online radio stations called Cousin Radio and
Red
and
Beats.
Red Beats.
I'm wearing the shirt right now.
And we're the second radio station in Alberta to put in an HD transmitter in Calgary. And with that HD transmitter, there's sub-channels on it. And if you go to your car radio and you go to 88.1 and you go to the tuner and click it one notch, it all of a sudden you'll hear East Indian music and it'll say HD2, 88.1 HD2. If you click it one more turn, you'll get 89.3 The Raven out of Edmonton. So the Raven
Wow.
is the Raven is actually broadcast in Calgary right now. 88.1, 2 clicks over to HD3, and you'll get the Raven station. So if you start looking at opportunities, we have 10 100,000 watt transmitters all around Alberta. So that's our next phase, is to change or convert all of these to HD. So in Edmonton, we have 200,000 watt transmitters, the Raven and CFWE. There's going to be 4 sub-channels in there, and so Red Beats and Cousin Radio will be HD2 and HD3 in Edmonton, and it'll be the same way all around Alberta. So with HD, you can pick up Red Beats and Cousin anywhere in the province. So that's expansion that's coming in the next couple of years. So, and down the road, what's coming is Elon Musk's Starlink and everything else that he's putting up
Wow.
is going to be there's going to be radio on those satellites. And just like your cell phone, when you drive down the road, your cell phone bounces from tower to tower to tower, right? Well, as you drive anywhere in Canada, your CJWE will bounce from satellite to satellite to satellite. So you don't run out of space when you're driving north to Edmonton. You don't run out at Red Deer. It just switches to a different satellite, and you keep listening all the way. So that's
That's
what's coming. That's what's coming.
That is wild. That's innovative and amazing for sure.
so you've seen like this evolution from print to radio now to HD radio, and you've kind of been ahead of the curve on all of this. Where do we go after satellite radio?
Whoa, I don't know. I'm retiring.
Oh wow.
Wow.
Oh, you have to listen to people in that are out there talking about all the possibilities, right? Okay, with newspaper. Okay, mail costs are going through the roof. Print costs are going through the roof. And advertising revenue was declining. So you have to look at what point do we switch, right? So at one point we became a digital newspaper. So you download it online, you'd flip the pages like the old print, and then that wasn't working. So we evolved to online. So Windspeaker is still here. It's just evolved. So what you do is you try to figure out what's coming, and you prepare yourself. So when you reach that time, then you just intersect, and then you start looking at what's long, and you start prepping for it, and you just have to keep your eyes open and see how like with HD radio, no one really saw the potential. I still don't. There's one other HD in Calgary, that's Chorus. And the reason I think someone told me they went HD was because someone paid for it because they wanted to be able to use the GPS. With as you drive, you have your GPS systems. They wanted to link onto that, but they're not using other radio stations for that. And and I had a CRTC commissioner tell me, I think you're the first one to really see the potential of HD radio. To go one step further, I could put in small community radios on one of those subchannels. For example, if I put Sixica on there, Sixica right now has a 50-watt transmitter, and they cover basically the reserve. But if they were, say, HD4, they would cover as far north as Innisfail, as far west as Morley, as far south as Claresholm, as far east as Brooks. That would be the coverage that they would have. And if we've got 10 of them, and we've got 10 small community radios across Alberta, I mean, it's not only us that are benefiting, it's the communities, right? communities like Alexis. I mean, they have so many of our First Nations have families and members living in the cities. What a way to reach. So there's all sorts of opportunities that we're looking out for. We're trying to see, okay, how can we benefit? What's the cost, et cetera, et cetera. So
you have been one of our wonderful guests here on season 2 of the Deadly Uncle podcast. This is a celebration of different men around our communities that are doing wonderful things. Everything from a good dad to people that are making steps to making new things happen, like yourself. And it's just been such a wonderful journey here because each season we do, we're doing 20 different men, and they're from all different communities and different tribes, and it's just amazing to see the positivity that we have in our communities, and the men that are following in our women's healing journeys, and just it's amazing.
Yeah, Bert, I just want to say thanks for you coming here today and sharing your story with us, because you truly have opened doors for Indigenous stories in Alberta. And by the sounds of it, we're only at the cusp, and we can expand even further. So thank you for all the work that you've done up until this point, and you're definitely a deadly uncle.
Yes.
I prefer grandpa, but
well, you can be a deadly grandpa then.
Yeah, you're deadly grandpa, deadly uncle, You're
listening to the Deadly Uncle podcast,
a safe space for Deadly Uncle conversations.
Next week on the Deadly Uncle podcast.
It was how do we combat the racism in Lethbridge? Yeah.
So one of the things too is that how we've been doing it is basically we need to start building those relationships and professional development. We really need to include the a lot of times we need to include a lot of the non-Aboriginal people to our events. So I'm trying to get more of the non-Aboriginal people coming to the powwows and to the different things that we do in the community, and to understand that